Most people think hotels are some of the safest places to sleep. After all, the doors lock automatically, the hallways are covered in security cameras, and there's always someone working the front desk. But anyone who has worked the night shift at a hotel will tell you something very different. Because after midnight, a hotel stops feeling like a place where travelers come to rest, and starts feeling like a building full of strangers you should never fully trust. Hundreds of rooms, hundreds of people you've never met, and sometimes someone who isn't supposed to be there at all. These are 6 true creepy stories from people who worked the night shift in hotels. The guest who was never checked in my name is Daniel, and a few years ago I worked the night shift at a small highway hotel just outside Eugene, Oregon. It wasn't a fancy place, mostly travelers passing through truck drivers and the occasional family stopping for the night before continuing their road trip in the morning. The job itself was usually quiet. My shift ran from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m., and most nights followed the same pattern. Around midnight, a few late arrivals would check in. By 1 or 2 in the morning, the lobby would go quiet, and the rest of the night was mostly paperwork, monitoring the security cameras, and answering the occasional phone call. If you've never been in a hotel lobby at 3 in the morning, it's hard to describe how strange it feels. The lights are always a little dimmer than during the day. The television in the corner plays some late-night infomercial that nobody is watching, and the air conditioner hums constantly in the background. Most of the time, the only real sound is the elevator dinging every now and then. On the night this happened, things were exactly like that. It was a little after 3 a.m., and I was sitting behind the front desk going through the next day's reservation list, when I heard footsteps coming from the hallway that leads from the guest elevators into the lobby. That wasn't unusual. Guests sometimes came down for snacks or cigarettes. But when I looked up, the man walking toward the desk immediately caught my attention. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, and wearing a dark coat, even though it was the middle of summer. His hair was messy, and he looked tired in the way people do after a long flight or a long drive. He didn't smile or say hello. He just walked up to the desk and placed a key card on the counter. "I'm checking out," he said. His voice was low and calm. Now that part alone wasn't strange. Guests occasionally checked out early in the morning if they needed to get back on the road. But something about the way he said it made me glance down at the computer. "Of course," I said. "What room were you in 214? I typed the room number into the system, and that's when the first strange thing happened. Room 214 showed as vacant. I frowned slightly and refreshed the reservation system, assuming maybe the computer had lagged. Still vacant. That didn't make sense. So I asked him again. "You said room 214? "Yes." He was looking straight at me, completely expressionless. At that point, I assumed there had simply been a mistake in the system earlier during check-in. It happens occasionally if someone forgets to finalize the reservation. "All right," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Let me just confirm your last name." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he just stared at me for a moment. Then he said, "I don't think it matters." Before I could respond, he turned around and walked out the front doors of the hotel. Just like that. No receipt, no confirmation thing. I sat there for a few seconds confused. Then I picked up the key card he had left on the desk. Sure enough, it was labeled 214. Now I was curious. Because if no one was checked into that room, how did he have the key? So I grabbed the master key card from behind the desk and decided to check the room myself. The hallway upstairs was quiet as usual. The carpet muffled my footsteps as I walked toward room 214. Everything looked normal, but when I reached the door, I immediately noticed something strange. The Do Not Disturb sign was hanging on the handle, which shouldn't have been possible, because according to the system, nobody had been staying there. I knocked. No answer. Front desk, I called out. Still nothing. So I used the master key and opened the door. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of the bathroom light. At first glance, it looked empty, but as soon as I stepped inside, I realized someone had definitely been there. The bed sheets were completely wrinkled, like someone had slept in them for hours. The bathroom sink was wet, and one of the towels was lying on the floor. There was even a half-empty bottle of water sitting on the nightstand. Someone had stayed in that room. There was no doubt about it. But according to our system, nobody had checked in. And I knew one thing for certain. I had been the one working the desk all night, which meant that if someone had gotten a room key for 214, they hadn't gotten it from me. I went back downstairs and immediately checked the security cameras. The cameras covering the lobby showed the man walking to the desk and leaving the building. But when I rewound the footage further back, there was no recording of him ever entering the hotel, no footage of him using the elevator, no footage of him walking through the lobby earlier that night. It was as if he had simply appeared upstairs in that room and then walked down to return the key. I worked that job for another year after that night. But one thing I always made sure to do during every shift was check the security cameras carefully. Because every now and then, around 3 in the morning, I would swear I saw someone standing in the hallway outside room 214. And every time I zoomed the camera in, the hallway would be empty. My name is Rachel, and during my last year of college, I worked the overnight shift at a mid-sized hotel just outside Phoenix, Arizona. It wasn't a luxury resort or anything like that, but it was nice enough. 7 floors, about 200 rooms, and a steady flow of business travelers and tourists year-round. I only took the job because it worked with my class schedule. My shift started at midnight and ended at 8 in the morning, which meant I could finish work, go home, sleep for a few hours, and then make it to my afternoon lectures. Most nights were incredibly boring. The first hour or two would usually involve a few late check-ins. After that, the lobby would become completely silent. Occasionally, someone would wander down to buy a snack or ask for extra towels. But most of the time, I spent the night sitting behind the desk doing homework or watching the security cameras. There were about 16 cameras in total, 1 covering the lobby, 1 in the parking lot, a few near the side entrances, and 1 at the end of every hallway on each floor. To be honest, the cameras made the job feel safer. If anything weird happened, you could usually see it before it reached the front desk. At least, that's what I thought. One night around 3:20 in the morning, the phone at the front desk rang. That wasn't unusual. Guests sometimes called to ask for wake-up calls or complain about noise. So I picked it up and did the usual greeting. Front desk, this is Rachel. How can I help you tonight? For a moment, there was nothing but static on the line. Then a man's voice spoke. Quiet, almost whispering. Someone is in my room. That immediately got my attention. "I'm sorry," I said. "There's someone in here." His voice sounded nervous, not angry, not confused, just scared. "Sir, what room are you in?" I asked. There was a short pause before he answered. 714. Room 714. I pulled up the room list on my computer, and that's when something strange popped up. Room 714 was marked as vacant. No guest registered. No key issued. Nothing. I frowned at the screen and said, "You sure that's the room number?" "Yes," he said. Then he added something that made my stomach twist. "They're in the bathroom." At that point, I was already standing up. "Okay," I said carefully. "Please, stay on the line with me." But before I could say anything else, the line went dead. Just silence. I stared at the phone for a second, then immediately called our overnight security guard on the radio. His name was Luis. He was a big guy in his 40s who had worked security jobs for years. "Luis," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "can you head up to room 714? "What's going on? I just got a call from that room. Guest says someone's inside." There was a pause on the radio. 714, he repeated. "Yeah, pretty sure that room's empty. That's what the computer says too." Another pause. Then Luis said, "All right, I'll go check." I watched the hallway camera for the 7th floor as he took the elevator up. The elevator doors opened. Luis stepped out and walked down the hallway toward room 714. Everything looked normal. He knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Then he used his master key card and opened the door. I leaned closer to the monitor as he stepped inside. About 30 seconds passed. Then Luis came back out into the hallway. He spoke into the radio. "Room's empty." "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yeah, nobody in here." "Check the bathroom," I said. I did. I felt a cold shiver run down my back. "Is there any sign someone was in there?" "Not really," he said. Then he added something strange. "Well, actually, what the bathtub faucet's running." That made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Was it flooding?" "No," he said. "Just dripping." Luis turned the water off and came back downstairs a few minutes later. We both assumed it had been a prank call. Maybe someone dialing random rooms from another hotel or using some weird phone spoofing thing. Still, something about it bothered me. Mostly because the caller had sounded genuinely terrified. The rest of the shift passed normally. Around 7 in the morning manager arrived and I told him about the call. He shrugged it off. "Probably a wrong number," he said. But later that day, while I was finishing paperwork before heading home, I got curious. So I looked up the room history for 714. That's when I noticed something. About 6 years earlier, there had been an incident report attached to that room. Apparently, a guest had called the front desk in the middle of the night saying someone was inside his bathroom. Security went up to check, just like Luis had. And just like that night, the room had been completely empty. I worked at that hotel for another 6 months after that, and during that time, the phone rang in the middle of the night thousands of times. But I never once received another call from room 714. Still, Whenever I walked past that door during my shift, I always found myself listening for one thing: the sound of water dripping from the bathroom sink. The man in the security cameras. My name is Victor, and for about 5 years I worked as the overnight security guard at a fairly large hotel in downtown Chicago. The building itself was pretty old, built sometime in the 1970s, but it had been renovated several times, so most guests never noticed its age. From the outside, it looked like any other city hotel. Bright lights, glass lobby doors, a steady flow of taxis and ride shares dropping people off. But once midnight passed and the last few guests checked in, the whole place felt completely different. Hotels are strange places at night. You've got hundreds of people sleeping in separate rooms, all strangers to each other. Long hallways with thick carpet that swallows the sound of footsteps. Elevators that open and close even when nobody seems to be around. My job was mostly simple. I spent most of the night sitting in the small security office behind the lobby, watching the camera feeds. Every hour or so, I'd do a walkthrough of the building, checking stairwells, side entrances, and the parking garage. There were 24 cameras in total. Lobby cameras, parking lot cameras, elevator cameras, and hallway cameras on every floor. Usually nothing interesting ever happened. But one night around 2 in the morning, I noticed something strange on one of the monitors. It was the camera for the 9th floor hallway. A man was standing near the vending machines. At first, I didn't think much of it. Guests wander the halls all the time looking for ice or snacks. But after about 30 seconds, I realized something was odd. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, facing the wall, completely still. I leaned closer to the screen. The man was tall and thin, wearing what looked like a dark jacket. His hair was messy, and his hands were in his pockets. But the strangest part was the way he stood. His head was tilted slightly downward, like he was staring at the floor or listening to something. I watched the camera feed for another minute. Still no movement. Eventually, I grabbed my radio and called the front desk. "Hey, you got anyone wandering around the 9th floor?" The guy working the desk that night. A kid named Trevor said. "Not that I know of." "Why?" "There's a guy just standing by the vending machines." Trevor laughed a little. "Maybe he's deciding between chips and candy." "Maybe," I said. But something about the situation still bothered me. So I decided to head upstairs and check it out. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. When the doors opened on the 9th floor, the hallway was completely silent. That heavy hotel quiet. You know the kind where every little sound echoes. I walked toward the vending machines, but when I reached the corner of the hallway, there was nobody there. The vending machines hummed softly. The ice machine buzzed, but the hallway itself was empty. I stood there for a moment, confused. Then I checked both directions of the corridor. Still nothing. No footsteps. No doors closing. Nothing. I went back downstairs and sat down in the security office again. Then I rewound the camera footage. The man was clearly visible on the recording, standing by the vending machines, exactly where I had seen him. I fast-forwarded a little. Then something strange happened. At one point, the camera flickered for just a split second, and when the picture came back, the man was gone. Not walking away, not entering a room, just gone. like someone had erased him from the hallway. I stared at the screen for a long time after that. Eventually, I convinced myself it had to be some kind of camera glitch. But then, something even stranger happened. About an hour later, while reviewing the other camera feeds, I saw the same man again. This time, he was standing in the hallway on the 6th floor. Same posture, same dark jacket, same stillness. Facing the wall, just standing there. I grabbed the radio again. "Trevor," I said, "did anyone check into a room on the 6th floor tonight?" "Yeah," he said. "A couple people." "Why?" "There's a guy standing in the hallway. Maybe he's drunk or something." "Maybe. But something about the way the man stood didn't feel like someone who was drunk. It felt like someone waiting." I went upstairs again. This time, I took the stairwell. When I reached the 6th floor, the hallway was empty. Completely empty. I walked the entire length of the corridor, checked every corner. Nothing. When I returned to the security office and looked back at the camera footage, the man had disappeared again. Same exact way. One frame, he was there. Next frame, he wasn't. I checked the elevator cameras. No sign of him entering or leaving. Checked the stairwell cameras. Nothing. It was like the guy only existed on the hallway cameras. I worked that job for another 2 years after that night, and every once in a while, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning, one of the hallway cameras would show that same man again, standing somewhere in the building, perfectly still, facing a wall. And every single time I went to check in person, the hallway would be completely empty. The room that should have been empty. My name is Marisol, and for almost 3 years, I worked in housekeeping at a large hotel near San Antonio, Texas. It was the kind of hotel that catered mostly to conferences and business travelers. Big lobby, lots of meeting rooms, and over 300 guest rooms spread across 8 floors. Most people probably don't realize how early housekeeping staff start their shifts. For us, the day usually began around 5:30 in the morning. By that time, the night shift was almost over. The breakfast area was being set up, and the hotel was just starting to wake up again. But before guests started moving around the hallways, we had a few quiet hours to clean the rooms that had been vacated overnight. Usually, the front desk would give us a printed list of rooms that had already checked out. Those were the first rooms we cleaned. On the morning this happened, I was assigned to the 6th floor. The hallway was quiet except for the hum of the ice machine and the sound of my cleaning cartwheels rolling along the carpet. I had already cleaned 3 rooms when I reached room 618. Immediately, I noticed something strange. The Do Not Disturb sign was hanging from the door handle. Normally, that wouldn't mean much. Guests leave those signs up all the time. But according to the housekeeping list I was given that morning, room 618 had checked out the previous day, which meant the room should have been empty. Sometimes guests forget to remove the sign before leaving, so I knocked lightly on the door. "Housekeeping," I called out. No answer. I waited a few seconds and knocked again. Still nothing. So I checked the hallway to make sure no one was nearby, then used my master key card to unlock the door. The room was dim with the curtains still drawn. At first glance, it looked normal. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew something wasn't right. The bed had been slept in, not just a little messy, completely wrinkled and pulled apart. like someone had spent the entire night there. The television was still on. It was playing one of those early morning news programs with the volume turned very low. I stood there for a moment confused. Maybe the front desk had made a mistake. Maybe the guest had extended their stay. So I grabbed the room phone and called the front desk. "Hey, I said this is Marisol on 6. I think someone's still in 618. The front desk agent sounded puzzled. "That room checked out yesterday afternoon." "Well," I said slowly, looking around the room, "someone definitely slept here last night." There was a pause on the phone. Then he said, "That's weird." I walked further into the room. The bathroom door was slightly open, and I could hear the faint sound of dripping water. When I pushed the door open, I saw that the shower floor was wet. Not damp. Wet. Like someone had just taken a shower. I suddenly felt very uncomfortable being in that room alone. "Are you sure no one is registered in this room?" I asked again. "I'm looking at the system right now," the front desk agent said. "Nope, nobody checked in. Can you come up here?" "Yeah, give me a minute." While I waited, I stood near the door, not wanting to go deeper into the room. That's when I noticed something sitting on the desk. A small black suitcase. It wasn't open, but it looked used, like it had been set there recently, which made even less sense. Because if someone had checked out the day before, why would their luggage still be there? About 2 minutes later, the front desk agent arrived with one of the security guards. The three of us stood in the room looking around. "See," I said, pointing at the bed. "Someone stayed here." The security guard walked into the bathroom and checked the shower. Still dripping. The front desk agent checked the computer again on his phone. "No reservation," he said. "No new check-in. Nothing." Then the security guard opened the suitcase. Inside were clothes. Men's clothes. A few shirts, jeans, and a pair of sneakers. All neatly folded. But there were no personal items. No wallet. No passport. No toiletries. Nothing that could identify who the suitcase belonged to. We all just stood there for a moment trying to figure it out. Finally, the front desk agent said, "Maybe someone forgot their bag." After sleeping in the room, I asked. He didn't answer. Eventually, management decided to store the suitcase in Lost and Found, and the room was cleaned like normal. But here's the strange part. 2 days later, a man walked up to the front desk, asking if a suitcase had been found in room 618. The manager brought the bag out. The man looked at it for a moment. Then he shook his head. "That's not mine," he said, and he walked out of the hotel. To this day, nobody knows whose suitcase that was, or who slept in that room the night after it was supposed to be empty. The elevator that stopped on floor 13. My name is Carl, and for about 4 years, I worked as the overnight maintenance technician at a large hotel in Denver, Colorado. Maintenance shifts in hotels are strange, especially the overnight ones. During the day, the maintenance team is busy fixing everything. Broken air conditioners, clogged sinks, loose door handles, malfunctioning lights. But at night, most of the building is asleep. My job was mostly to be on standby in case something urgent happened. A guest might call because their heater stopped working, or a pipe might start leaking somewhere in the building. Other than that, the night shift mostly meant walking through the hotel once every hour or two, checking the mechanical rooms, stairwells, and elevators. And elevators in particular are something you pay close attention to. Because when elevators malfunction in a hotel, it becomes a serious problem very quickly. Now, the hotel where I worked had 12 guest floors. But if you looked at the elevator buttons, you might notice something strange. There was no button for the 13th floor. That's actually pretty common in hotels. A lot of buildings skip that number entirely because some guests find it unlucky. So after floor 12, the elevator panel jumped straight to 14. Officially, the 13th floor didn't exist. But that didn't mean there wasn't a physical space there. Technically, the level between floors 12 and 14 still existed inside the building structure. It was just sealed off and used mostly for storage and old mechanical equipment. Guests had no way to access it. At least, that was the idea. One night around 2:30 in the morning, I was sitting in the small maintenance office near the basement when I got a call from the front desk. "Hey, Carl. The night manager said one of the elevators is acting weird." "What kind of weird?" "It keeps stopping between floors." That wasn't completely unusual. Elevator sensors can get confused sometimes. "Which elevator?" I asked. "Elevator 3. So I grabbed my toolkit and headed to the elevator bank. Sure enough, elevator 3 was moving slowly up and down the building, stopping on random floors, opening its doors, then closing again. No one inside. I stepped in when it reached the lobby and pressed the button for the control panel key. That allowed me to put the elevator into maintenance mode. Then I started running a diagnostic cycle. Normally, the elevator would go floor by floor. Lobby. Everything looked normal until it reached floor 12. Instead of continuing to 14 like it should have, the elevator stopped, right between the floors. The digital display flickered for a second. Then it showed something I had never seen before. 13. I stared at the number. That shouldn't have been possible. There was no button for that floor. The elevator doors slowly slid open, and I was looking at a narrow hallway, dimly lit. The lights above flickered softly. The floor looked unfinished, bare concrete instead of carpet. I stepped halfway out of the elevator. Technically, I had access to this level because of my job, but I had only been up there once before during training. It was mostly storage rooms and old equipment that hadn't been used in years. But something about the hallway felt wrong. The air felt colder than the rest of the building, and the lights weren't all on, just a few dim fixtures spaced far apart. As I stood there, I heard something. Footsteps. Slow footsteps, echoing somewhere down the hallway. I froze. There shouldn't have been anyone up there. The floor was locked off for guests, and none of the staff had any reason to be there at that hour. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard something else. A soft, dragging sound, like someone pulling a suitcase across the concrete floor. "Hello," I called out. My voice echoed down the hallway. No answer, just silence. I waited for a few seconds. Then the elevator behind me made a loud ding. The doors started closing automatically. I stepped back inside quickly. As the doors slid shut, I looked one last time down the hallway, and for just a split second, I thought I saw someone standing at the far end. A tall figure, completely still, half hidden in the darkness. The elevator doors closed. The display flickered again. Then the elevator started moving upward. When the doors opened on the 14th floor, everything looked normal again. The carpeted hallway, the quiet hum of the air conditioning. I checked the elevator logs later that night. According to the system, Elevator 3 had never stopped on floor 13. The system recorded it going directly from floor 12 to 14. But after that night, I noticed something strange. Every once in a while, usually sometime after 2 in the morning, Elevator 3 would pause for a few seconds between those floors, as if someone had pressed a button that technically didn't exist. The knocking on the door. My name is Emily, and a few years ago I worked the night shift at a medium-sized hotel just outside Seattle. I was the only front desk employee on duty from midnight until 7 in the morning. There was technically a security guard scheduled overnight, but most nights he spent his time patrolling the parking garage or helping guests who locked themselves out of their rooms. So for the most part, the front desk felt very isolated. The lobby lights were dim. The street outside was usually quiet, and the only sounds inside the building were the occasional elevator chime or the low hum of the vending machines. Most nights passed slowly, but one night, around 3:45 in the morning, the phone rang. I answered like usual. "Front desk, this is Emily. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end sounded tense. "Hi, I'm in room 512. "Okay," I said. "There's someone knocking on my door." I frowned slightly. "That's strange," I said. "Did you see who it was?" The guest said. I looked through the peephole, but no one was there. That wasn't completely unheard of. Sometimes people knock on the wrong door, realize their mistake, and walk away before the person inside answers. "Maybe someone was looking for the wrong room," I said. But the guest interrupted me. "No," he said quietly. "They've knocked 3 times now." That made me pause. Are they knocking right now? It just stopped. I pulled up the hallway camera for the 5th floor. The monitor showed the long carpeted corridor outside room 512, and it was completely empty. "No one's in the hallway," I said. "Are you sure?" the guest asked. "Yes." There was a moment of silence. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. It just happened again. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow knocks. I stared at the monitor. The hallway outside his room was still empty. "No one's there," I said. "Well, someone's knocking," the guest replied. His voice sounded much more nervous now. "Can you send someone up here?" I grabbed the radio and called the security guard. "Mark, can you head up to the 5th floor?" "What's going on?" Guest in 512 says someone keeps knocking on his door. "All right, I'm on my way." While Mark took the elevator up, I kept watching the hallway camera. Still empty. A minute later, Mark stepped out of the elevator and walked toward room 512. I watched him knock on the door. The guest opened it immediately. They talked for a few seconds. Then, Mark checked both ends of the hallway. Nothing. He spoke into the radio. "Hallway's clear." "Did the guest hear the knocking again?" I asked. "Not since I got here." The guest seemed embarrassed. He probably thought someone had been messing with him. Mark eventually came back downstairs, and everything went quiet again. About 15 minutes passed. Then the phone rang again. It was the same guest. "They're knocking again," he whispered. This time his voice sounded genuinely scared. I pulled up the camera again. The hallway was still completely empty. Knock, knock, knock. The guest gasped on the phone. "You hear that I don't see anyone?" I said. "Can you look again?" I am. Then something strange happened. On the camera feed, the door to room 512 slowly opened, but the hallway outside was still empty. No one was standing there. No one had walked up to the door. Nothing. Just the door opening. The guest suddenly shouted into the phone, "Hello." Then there was silence. A few seconds later, he said, "Okay." I think it stopped. The door closed again. Eventually, the guest came downstairs about half an hour later to check out early. He looked exhausted. When I asked him what had happened, he shook his head. "I don't know," he said. But whoever was knocking, they were definitely standing right outside the door. He left the hotel just before sunrise, and I never saw him again. But ever since that night, whenever I stay in a hotel myself, and I hear a knock at the door late at night, I always look through the peephole first, because sometimes there might not be anyone there. Hotels are places most people associate with comfort. A quiet room, a locked door, a temporary place to rest before continuing a journey. But for the people who work the night shift, hotels can feel very different. After midnight, the hallways grow quiet. The lobby empties out. Hundreds of strangers sleep behind closed doors, each room hiding its own story. And sometimes, those stories don't make sense. A guest who was never checked in. A phone call from an empty room. A man who only appears on security cameras. A suitcase in a room that should have been empty. An elevator stopping on a floor that doesn't exist. Or knocking on a door when nobody is standing outside. For the people who experienced these things, they were moments that stayed with them long after their shifts ended. If you enjoyed these stories and want to hear more like them, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. And if you have your own creepy or unexplained experience you'd like to share, you can send your story to the email in the description below. Who knows, your story might appear in a future video. Until then, stay safe. And maybe think twice the next time you hear someone knocking on your hotel room door in the middle of the night.